1. So this was something that happened my freshman year of college. Being new to a campus that I didn't have many friends on, I began seeking out some cool people to hang out with, as I had long breaks between my classes. I quickly found myself spending time with a large group of girls from my math class. We began spending time in the lounge area of my campus and made some friends through there too. To give an idea, it was a relatively smaller campus with only a few buildings, and the lounge area was quite a small room with some pool tables and seats. As the semester went on, we began making it a regular ordeal to all go for lunch or coffee at least once a week. Our lunch group went from 5 people to nearly 20. Friends started bringing acquaintances and our group grew. One kid named Spencer, who was a friend's friend, joined us regularly for coffee or lunch. One day, word got back to me he was into me and wanted to get my number. I nicely told my friend that I wasn't interested and that I had a boyfriend, a lie. I thought this would deter him, as he came off as a non-confrontational person. One morning, a group message was sent out by my friend Trish, who asked if we all wanted to meet up for coffee, and everyone for the most part agreed to meet. I arrived about 10 minutes early to almost everything, so I was used to being the first one there. Spencer arrived shortly after me. He sat down next to me, and I exchanged a friendly good morning and a smile. Slowly time passed and no one else showed up. We sat awkwardly for about 15 minutes, and finally he spoke up and said,
"This is a surprise date. I planned it."
I think it's important to mention I'm pretty hot-headed and I don't like being lied to. I got up from the chair, gathered my things, and left without a word. The next couple of weeks went by without a word from Spencer. I thought that maybe he had gotten the hint that I wasn't interested. Soon though, he started showing up at the same time I worked out at the school gym. I didn't think much of it because our schedules were pretty similar, so like myself I just assumed this was the only time he had to work out. Soon it went from being there at the same time to him following me around the gym. Whatever machine I was using, he was conveniently at the one right next to me, lifting light weight and staring. I had some friends that worked the front desk of the gym, so I mentioned it to them, and they said they'd take care of it if it got out of hand. One day I was squatting at the gym, and mid-rep, he walked up, pulled my headphone out, and proceeded to tell me my form was off and grabbed my waist. I racked my bar and turned around, angrily telling him, "Don't fucking touch me!" He apologized and proceeded to ask me out once again. I told him I wasn't interested and had a boyfriend anyways. I didn't. Once again, a couple weeks went by, and the only contact I had with Spencer was sitting at the opposite end of the table during our lunch gatherings. I thought he had finally gotten the hint. Then one day at the gym, I was walking down the hallway to the girls' locker room, when he walked up behind me and put both hands on either side of the wall behind my head. He said, "I know you feel the connection I do. Why don't you let me take you out?" I quickly yelled for my friend Chris, who worked the gym's front desk. Keep in mind, Chris is very large, 6'3", and extremely fit, whereas Spencer is 5'7", and, well, wasn't fit. Chris quickly walked around the corner to see what was happening, and came running down the hall yelling at Spencer. He was then banned from the gym and not allowed back in. One night I get a text message from a random stranger stating that it's Spencer, and he wanted to apologize for what happened at the gym. I told him what he did wasn't okay, and that I wasn't interested in him, and I'd like for him to leave me alone from now on. He apologized again, and again I didn't hear anything else, thinking that was the last time I blocked his number. All was well until one day I came home from work to a bouquet of white lilies sitting on my doorstep. Thinking they were for my grandma, she does sweet stuff like this, I got excited, picked them up, and took them inside. Then I read the letter. It was unsigned and just said, "I love watching you." I frantically started calling and texting friends thinking this was a sick joke, as they knew about how creepy Spencer had been. I got concerned answers and honest no's from every single one. I panicked, threw the flowers out, and made sure to lock my door. Later that night I get a text from a random number that said, "You didn't enjoy your flowers? I saw you throw them away." At this point I'd had enough. I called the number and the familiar voice of Spencer was on the line. I lost my shit. Almost literally. I didn't even let him get past his sickening hello before I started screaming at him. He then calmly stated if I wanted to talk to him to come outside. I looked out my window and there he was, standing right in front of my house, smiling. I called the cops. and when they showed up, they detained him, and I got a restraining order placed on him. The cops then contacted me a couple days later to let me know he has more than one restraining order placed on him for the same behavior, 10 including mine to be exact. I had late classes this semester after this, and called campus police to walk me to my car every night, because I was terrified he would show up again. Shortly after that, I moved about 300 miles away, and luckily I've never seen him again, other than his every so often random Instagram follow request. So Spencer, let's not ever meet again. 2. About 4 years ago, I was a line cook at a restaurant that was located in a hotel. I worked at this restaurant for nearly 2 years with no problem, walking the half-mile or so distance it took me to reach the bus I took to get home from my job. This restaurant had a partnership with the hotel for late-night room service, so pretty much every night after closing the restaurant, 1, sometimes 2 line cooks would stay until after 3 a.m., preparing simple things like salads, sandwiches, and wraps that would then be taken to the rooms via hotel employees. Now, me being a recent college grad in my early 20s would always volunteer myself for the extra hours. Student loans and rent cost a lot of money. As I said prior, I had worked this job a decent amount of time with no problems, except for one rainy night I'll never forget. As I left my work that morning around 3 a.m., I realized I messed up when I forgot an umbrella that day. I now had to make my normal walk under decent rainfall. After lighting a cigarette and putting in my headphones, I was ready to make my unfortunate journey. I started on my normal routine walking back, cutting through the alleyways I had memorized as my shortcuts throughout the city. About halfway through my walk, a car started following next to me, with the passenger window down. Aware of my surroundings, I recognized this but decided to mind my business and keep my head down and keep walking. Growing up in a rough neighborhood taught me better than to put my nose where it doesn't belong. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. Over the music coming from my headphones, I could hear shouting coming from the car. I turned to face the car driver but didn't stop walking. He looked back at me. A white man in his late 30s, early 40s with a bandana and sunglasses on. I remember thinking, it was odd. He was driving with sunglasses so late at night. "Hey man, where you heading?" I could hear him say. At this point, I took out one earbud and replied, "What's it to you?" To which he answered, "I figured I'd ask. You look like you need a ride to get out of the rain." I told the guy I'm all set and that I was almost at my destination. Now keep in mind I'm still walking and he is driving slowly next to me on this side of the street at 3 a.m. "No problem," he replied. "Do you smoke weed, man?" he asked. At this point, I was annoyed with the guy. I had just gotten done working 13 hours in a kitchen, and all I wanted to do was listen to some music and unwind before bed. "Nah, man, I don't," even though I do. I replied in a stern and obviously annoyed tone. He just looked at me, almost like he knew I was bullshitting him. I said, "Have a good night," before replacing my earphone back into my ear and taking a right up a one-way street, losing him in the process. I arrived at my bus stop safely, and with about 10 minutes to spare, I was the only one there besides one other man and a homeless man sleeping on a bench some ways up. After about 3 minutes, that car pulls up to the side of the curb, directly in the bus lane. This time I'm facing him. He rolled down the window. "You're heading to the south side, huh?" he said. I replied, "How do you know?" He pointed above me. I looked up. On the digital board it says the next bus destination and time. "You want to live there? I'm heading there anyway," he said. At this point I was all set and the hood came out of me. "Ah, man, I don't know you and I don't want to ride with you, so fuck off, fool," I said angrily. He just stared at me again, but this time I stared back. We locked eyes for a good 20 seconds before the bus approached behind him, honking loudly. The guy checked his rearview mirror, rolled up the window, and sped off. On the way home, I remember looking behind me and my surroundings to make sure this creep didn't try to follow me home. Luckily, he didn't, and when I got off the bus, I was in my apartment safe within 5 minutes. Fast forward a week. One of my buddies who I work with asked me if I heard about the body the cops found in a dumpster behind the grocery store, less than 5 minutes from the hotel. I replied no. He told me the body was of a girl found strangled to death, and cops are on the lookout for a killer still at large. The cops had no evidence and were asking for people to come forward with additional information. I hadn't told my buddy or anyone besides my girlfriend at the time what happened that night. When I told him the story, he insisted I call the cops and tell them what happened. I told him I would, but I never did. Call me old school, but like I said earlier, I learned growing up to mind my own business and avoid trouble, and trouble won't find me. So that's what I did. To this day, I haven't heard anything more on the case. I wonder if it was the same guy. I think about how weird it was for him to approach me the way he did. At such an odd hour of the day, the sunglasses, the following me to the bus stop. That stuff doesn't normally happen, right? After that experience, I started walking home with a paring knife in my pocket, and walked with only one earphone in the whole time so I could hear my surroundings better. I also stopped volunteering for the overnight shift. I hope whoever killed that girl gets caught or has a change of heart. It's crazy how fragile life is. 3. When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug, or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up, and from there they divorced, and my mother and I moved across country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone, and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me, as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying they'd gone to Florida for a few days, and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town, and I knew most of the people, if not by name, then by face enough to wave and small chat with, and had never before been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late watching television. I remember I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on USA Channel, and had most of the lights on in the house, not because I was afraid, but because at 13 I wasn't concerned with electricity bills or saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party and people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze, because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen where the back door is. My heart started racing in my chest, because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen, which leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could to make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman, from playing hide-go-seek in the dark many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was still nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen, not toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything. It's like they were just moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream. However, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and ran down the hallway. And I believe the only reason I wasn't overcome was because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid. I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time, as it was right off the side of the couch. When I was 10, I got a bird for my birthday. He was a blue-fronted Amazon, and I named him Boo. because it was October and close to Halloween. Boo had a large iron cage. It could have been metal, but very large, sturdy, and like 6 feet tall. And it was kept in my room, despite the fact that Boo, like me, pretty much had the run of the house whenever he wanted. This information will become very relevant later on in the story. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking, on the verge of tears, when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet, and because of that, it was even more frightening. It wasn't like manic laughter, but as if they were genuinely amused. It was the laughter that really frightened me, and I started heavily, hysterically crying, and looking around my room to figure out what I could do. That was when I realized Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever it was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in, because suddenly they threw themselves at my door, and you could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted violently. Boo, who had been stirred by the movement awake, began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have screamed with him, but honestly I don't remember screaming. I just remember being extremely scared. Terrified, I crawled under my bed and couch, a bunk bed with a futon on the bottom, metal, and waited. Several minutes passed and the person eventually stopped attacking my door. Boo continued screaming even after he had stopped. Though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure, I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. And it was also several feet off the ground, as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, terrified for what felt like hours. I must have fallen asleep because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why, and scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there. I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside, and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out a window is a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not, and am still not, the most coordinated human being. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed the back door was wide open. Scared, but feeling braver now that I was outside, and that it was morning instead of pitch-black night, I walked up the back steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, no terrifying man leering at me, basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe on how stupid this could have turned out, and that I wish I could have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in the closets and under beds, behind the couch, anywhere I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's bedroom so I could check it, and then relocked it afterwards. When I was positive there was no one there, I went back to the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, checked all the windows and front door, and then called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on forward. So terrifying, laughing, crazy person that broke into my house on New Year's Eve, please let's never meet again. I sincerely hope no other young girl had to meet you either. I don't know if you were just some drunk visitor or a neighbor, But you terrorized me that night. I was afraid of being alone when my mom was working, and to this day, I still get scared when I am home alone. Overthink what I would do if someone came inside and where I would hide. When my cats make noise out of nowhere, I immediately investigate, for fear of someone trying to get in. P.S. My mom had to help lift me back into my bedroom so I could move Boo's cage out of the corner between my bedroom door and closet. And we moved in town to an apartment a year later. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 455. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, a rather appropriate final story there as we're heading toward the end of this year. Let's see. That's 1, 2. Yep, it's about 3 weeks away. Yeah, about 3 weeks away, slightly less. Currently, I've just begun on the massive recording session so that I can take the Christmassy New Year week off. We will have lots of stories and videos up then. That's the plan. As is usual, when I do record to take time off, that might mean there's some days where you don't get the expected type of videos up, but there will be something up on that day, something entertaining. I'm not sure if now Christmas Day falls on a Wednesday, and usually that'd be True Scary Stories. And obviously there aren't going to be a lot of people listening to YouTube on Christmas Day. There will be some people when they're done with dinner and relaxing later, even if you just need time to get away from family. So I don't know if I should put a Scary Stories video up, or if I should put something a bit more light-hearted on Christmas Day. I am open to feedback because I'll record everything anyway, but the upload order is not set in stone because I won't be recording the Christmassy ones probably until next week. Yeah. Okay, so let me know what you think. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.